We don't even have to rewrite this intro. Another week, another Trump indictment. I know we just said that the last one was the most important, but we've changed our minds. We'll talk about why this Georgia case is truly a unique threat to Trump. Then, Hunter Biden's plea deal fell apart as US Attorney David Weiss was granted special counsel status to continue that investigation. What do these developments mean for the president and his campaign? Finally, Trump, Desantis, and much of the rest of the GOP field have spent quality time this week in Iowa. We'll break down the cringiest moments from their campaign appearances. And before we start the show, we've been fortunate enough to acquire a whole lot of new viewers and listeners here lately, so it's a good time for a fresh explainer about this show. Let's start with the title, Majority 54. In the past few elections, about 54% of Americans have regularly voted for progress, and the purpose of this show is to serve the people who are part of that progressive American majority, but have people close to them in their lives who are not. I'm an Army vet from Kansas City and the former Secretary of State of Missouri, and I even kind of ran for president for a minute. And Ravi has worked on and won hundreds of progressive campaigns in red states, including as part of both the Obama campaign and the Obama administration. And we both believe that the best way to expand the progressive majority is for you to find ways to keep your relationships with your Trump-loving friends from high school or your conservative brother, and in the process, even bring some of them along to our side. We think talking politics with people from work or school or your husband's family is the surest way for all of us to expand that 54%. So every week, Ravi and I go through the news and give you tips on how we think you should approach those conversations. So here we go. This is Majority 54.
All right, Trump, Jason.
Oh, man.
Slip. So it's on my mind. I can't get rid of this guy. Yeah, I was actually in LaGuardia Airport. I got there and I was about to fly to Maine, and basically was getting prodded. All right, you got to do a reaction podcast on this Georgia case. So I wound up slipping into a phone booth and doing a 15-minute explainer at LaGuardia Airport. That was in my Pacino, just when I thought it was out, they pulled me back in moment. And honestly, like that intro, I know we said that the last case was the most important, but actually this one is the most important, I think, for a couple of reasons. One is there are more defendants involved. So there are 19 defendants in this case, including notably Rudy Giuliani and Mark Meadows. And so just like the sheer quantity of defendants, the possibility of people flipping on each other, the conspiracy element, which we'll talk about. But I think the most important feature of this case is where it takes place, which is in Georgia. And that makes this the most threatening case against Trump because, number one, you can't shut down an investigation when you become president if it's a state investigation. So these lawyers don't report to him. But most importantly, you can't pardon for a state crime. So unlike in other states, such as New York, the clemency isn't up to the governor in Georgia. And so the state constitution has a board of pardons and paroles with 5 members who are confirmed by the governor and appointed by the governor, confirmed by the Senate. And they run staggered 7-year terms. And the fine print here, Jason, is really interesting. For the pardon application, it says people convicted of crimes will be considered only if the applicant has completed his or her full sentence obligation, including serving any probated sentence and paying any fine, and has been free of supervised and or criminal involvement for at least 5 consecutive years thereafter, as well as 5 consecutive years immediately prior to applying. It also says they cannot have any pending charges. Jason, you think that might be an issue for Trump if he seeks a pardon eventually?
As I said on another show, given the fact that he's about to be in court more than Sam Waterston, which is, I don't know, you got to watch a lot of Law and Order to get that joke. But I'm thinking that yeah, he's going to have a problem with that no other charges part. I mean, not to mention the fact that you're talking about a board that is originally appointed by Brian Kemp, which, though a Republican, is not exactly a guy appointing probably a lot of like super pro-Trump people. So I think that'll be a problem. Yeah.
Yeah. This judge is interesting too. He's 34 years old. Does that make you feel old, Jason? It does. It's like when you're looking at these professional athletes who are younger than you, like now the judges are younger than us too.
Yeah. That's right.
It's like, it's just going to get worse from here. Let's actually go to Willis announcing these charges, because she was fairly clear in this announcement what this was all about and got right to the heart of this conspiracy.
Today, Based on information developed by that investigation, a Fulton County grand jury returned a true bill of indictment, charging 19 individuals with violations of Georgia law arising from a criminal conspiracy to overturn the results of the 2020 presidential election in this state. The indictment includes 41 felony counts and is 97 pages long.
So the sort of elements of this are: one, lying to the Georgia state legislature, lying to state officials, creating fake pro-Trump electors, harassing election workers, soliciting Justice Department officials, soliciting Vice President Pence, breaching vote machines, and engaging in a cover-up. 161 separate actions, the prosecutor said, were taken to further this conspiracy. She's, as she mentioned, there are 41 counts. 22 of those are related to forgery or false documents and statements. 8 related to soliciting or impersonating public officers. Impersonating public officers, by the way. Wow. 3 related to influencing witnesses.
To hear about that.
3 related to election fraud and defrauding the state. 3 related to computer tampering. So these are pretty tangible crimes.
Yeah, I mean, this is the kind of stuff where like there's paperwork, right? I mean, literally, like forging, like that means there's paperwork, right? Like you either forged it or you didn't. I thought it might be helpful for us to do 2 things here for people who are going to end up talking about this with people in their life, which is 1, talk about what racketeering is real quick, and 2, and I'm going to give the simplest explanation I can, and then 2, anticipate some of what they're going to hear about Fani Willis. So 1, on racketeering, I mean, the simplest explanation I can give of racketeering is basically just that it is running a racket. That's the root word, right? I mean, it's organized crime. I mean, the RICO statutes were created to go after the mob and organized crime. And actually, Fani Willis has been really I don't even want to say creative. I would say innovative as a prosecutor, well before she was the elected prosecutor, just as a line prosecutor in the office, about using it in gang cases, using it in all sorts of situations, using it in one instance with school officials who had been involved in a cheating scandal regarding standardized test scores. And so it's not new for her to use it in something that might not be directly considered like your typical organized crime situation, but that's what racketeering is. That's where a lot of this comes from. And then the other thing I just wanted to let people know, like, I think you're about to hear a lot of stuff about this prosecutor. And I think, I was looking through her background, and one thing we haven't heard much yet in the mainstream, I'm sure it's been all over, Truth Social or whatever, but I think you're about to hear a lot more often, is that her father was a Black Panther. Now, that's not relevant to this at all, or even necessarily like bad, but I think you're about to hear it very, very often, and I wanted to call it out now because that's what we do on this show, is say, like, here's the distractions that they're about to throw at you.
Yeah, who else was innovative in the use of racketeering statutes, which we call RICO statutes, Jason?
I'm thinking Rudy Giuliani.
Yes, sir. Well, as a Staten Islander, we were very familiar with this because he was the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York, and he was a heroic figure in New York at the time. This is before he was mayor. He was known as the guy who took on the mafia. And you can watch Fear City, which is a docuseries on Netflix, which I think does a pretty good job of talking about the origins of these RICO statutes, racketeering statutes, and actually how there was this like little known Cornell professor who basically looked at the existing RICO law on the books that hadn't been used at the time, and basically was, went to federal prosecutors in the 80s and said, hey, you could use this to bring down the mafia, which is what they did precisely. And Giuliani was at the lead of that. Now he is the target of a RICO indictment, which is insane. He's also apparently broke, Jason. There's been a number of stories in the past 24 hours about he's struggling to pay his legal bills. There also was a story in CNBC yesterday that Trump stiffed Giuliani on a bill for Giuliani's work for Trump. Now,
shocking.
I mean, it's unreal. I tried to make sense of all of his bills, And it was really hard to make sense of. He's paying like these services to host his cell phone that was seized, and he's paying for Georgia, like some of these Georgia election workers that he defamed. He's had to pay penalties to them. I mean, he has a really like extensive set of legal bills, and I think like I could see him flipping like with all of this, you know.
Well,
'Cause
I mean, I
he would
would.
know more than anybody what Trump was asking him to do. You know, he was probably the one on the phone with Trump.
I mean, in fact, I think in many cases he was the one coming up with some of the bad ideas.
Yeah.
So I think for sure. Also, it's just kind of interesting to look back and think about the course that Giuliani's life has taken, and that there was, after he was not elected, after he didn't get the nomination, like there was a pretty standard off ramp, right? Go be a guy who gets involved in things you care about. You don't actually have to sign up with the demagogue and go full whatever with Trump, but he chose to, and like it's just such a different path that dude's life could have taken. And now I just wonder if he's going to get to a point where he goes, you know what? I don't actually want to go to prison. And I mean, he's an older guy. Like he's got to say, like, I don't actually want to die in prison. And so I would really think that there's a high chance of that. I would also think that there's a pretty decent chance that Mark Meadows is cooperating, because we haven't heard anything from Mark Meadows, and he is definitely not subscribing to the whole "I'm going to litigate my case in public" sort of strategy that so many others in the Trump world have. So
Worth underscoring, Jason, the chances of a flip here are much higher, not just because it's a conspiracy case, but because Trump can't dangle pardons to any of these people. So like the pardons are not just a problem for Trump directly, but it's a problem for him in keeping everybody organized and behind him. And so this is a real issue for I mean, I want to take a step back and say it's wild that this is how we talk about the president of the United States, and that he's accused of being the leader of a criminal, a multi-state criminal conspiracy. I mean, I know that every week brings new ground with Trump, but I would say this is the wildest turn of any of these indictments.
It is the wildest turn, and yet at the same time, I feel like this is the case that makes it easiest to help people in your life see Trump in the proper light. And here's what I mean, is that all the federal indictments are, they're going to become like blue versus red, right? When you have these conversations, it's the stuff that Trump says. It's, well, Biden's going after me because of politics, etc. But given the fact that this is a RICO case, it is an organized crime prosecution, it allows you, I think, to step back and say, well, can we talk about who Donald Trump actually is? Like, take Donald Trump, the politician, out of it. This is a guy who came up in the New York real estate world, going boom and bust, then got into casinos, then got into, right? Like, is it really at all shocking that at the end of the day, so many of these accusations against Trump, though they are in a political or a governing context, they're actually just like painting him as what he's probably always been, which is like a guy who's cutting corners and dealing with unsavory characters and encouraging people to break the law so that he can make a profit. It's just that in this case, the profit is political. And so, like, at the end of the day, I just think this reveals that he's always been an aspiring mob boss, and he just finally found a mob that would follow him.
Do you understand? So I've been hearing people, I mean, the Trump arguments are relatively standard and almost identical to the last case. First Amendment, there's no evidence that he directly committed the crimes. Although I want to remind people that this whole investigation started because he's on audio tape asking for a particular amount of votes. But
an amount that amounted to enough to give him a 1-vote victory.
Unbelievable.
Anyway,
but they're arguing a couple of arguments. One is, why did it take you so long? I'm not sure exactly what that does for them. Two is, I'm starting to hear that this should be a federal case and that they're going to try to get this transferred to federal because there's multi-state. How does that work? I didn't realize you can get a state case transferred to federal.
Well, if it's I think if it's a federal question, right, you can argue that it should be, and that's what Meadows is doing, which I think Meadows is the one who's moved for that, which is interesting, which I also find interesting because it means that Meadows is for the most part, not under the umbrella of people who Trump is paying for their defense, right? Which again leads me to feel like a guy who's been very quiet, who also did cooperate somewhat with the congressional investigation, may be cooperating or maybe looking to cooperate.
Oh, so Brett helpfully pointed out that if Meadows successfully moves the Georgia case to federal court, it's still Fannie Willis's office that prosecutes, and it's still tried under Georgia state laws, and a conviction still can't be pardoned. But I guess the advantage to them would be he's trying to get the draw of a Trump-appointed judge, and I think part of it has to do with the timing of this case. Because
I would say most likely the way federal jurisdictions work, I bet it also gives you a much wider draw on your jury pool, so that your jury pool probably comes from that federal district as opposed to, the county that has elected the county trial court.
And this is
then you get like regular Georgia,
and the other piece,
I don't know what regular Georgia means, but you know what I mean. Georgia beyond Atlanta is what they're looking for jurors.
Right. Yeah. I think the other issue here is Willis, I think intends to try, I'm hearing that intends to try the 19 defendants together. I don't know how that's going to work. She also said that it's going to happen within 6 months. I don't think that's possible with this many defendants and this complex of a case, but I'll be fascinated to see her try. That feels very fast. Obviously, like, we want swift justice here, but that seems tough. I mean, this is another one of those cases where this thing could bleed right into the very end of this election. And I think this one in particular this one might be on TV. I'm hearing, like, this one might be televised.
I hadn't heard that.
Yeah, I've heard that, and Brett might know better than we do at this point, but I'm hearing claims to that effect. Yeah, he said yes. I'm hearing those claims, which obviously will be great for the Meidas Network. But could you imagine 19 defendants on the in the dock, like, and including Giuliani and Meadows, and Trump in court in the middle of an election season? Oh my God.
Some of which are going to testify. I mean, you're going to have Giuliani in there with his hair running down his back, the whatever that stuff is he puts in there. And like, I mean, that's going to be like, how many different limited series will be made about this when we're in our 60s? Like, I mean, one for like every possible defendant.
I mean, they're churning these things out really fast. The Depp Heard documentary is already out. I mean, they do these things so fast. I just logged on to Netflix yesterday, and it popped up. I'm like, this is like record timing. So okay. I think before we move on any of this stuff, I think we need to revisit our power rankings here.
Right.
I think this one goes to the top now. I think I go this one number one.
Our power rankings of Trump indictments.
Yeah, meaning most threatening to him, I think being the most important standard. I think this is number one. I think the last, the election interference DC one, even though I think they have less dead to rights than number 3, which is the Miami case. I think the Miami jury and judge make that number 3 for me, and then I'd put Bragg a very, very, very distant 4th, even though that's a state level crime. And I just think that one is just not as threatening. I don't know. Although that one can't be pardoned either.
Yeah, I mean, that's why you've got to believe that I think I agree with you that this goes to number 1 in terms of the most threatening, because there is no scenario under which the only scenario under which he gets out of a conviction is if there is some real stretch of a legal argument or made by an appellate court, ultimately the Georgia Supreme Court, right? Like, that's the only way, is if that at some point, which is, without having looked at all of it, it's conceivable that I suppose if there were a very partisan makeup of a Georgia Supreme Court, that they could look at the use of the RICO statute here and do something that they've clearly never done in any of the other convictions that she's done under the RICO statute, and say, well, this didn't actually apply, and just try and, that'd be the only escape hatch, because even like another Republican president can't, like, he doesn't have to win. Another, like, you could, because there's a world in which he's the nominee and he wins and he pardons himself. There's a world in which he loses the nomination and another Republican wins and is made to pardon him from all these things. And then there's a world in which he or somebody else is the nominee, but Biden wins re-election. But then in 4 years, they get, you get a Republican president who ends up having to pardon him. In which case, maybe he does some prison time, maybe he doesn't. Like, those are the only scenarios, but none of those actually apply to this case. So yeah. I think
I would actually,
top.
I'd put fifth the Milwaukee case. No, I was just kidding. I was just going to see if I could slip through a case.
I was absolutely like, that totally worked. Because I was like, what did he do in Milwaukee?
I'm sure he did something. I just wanted to see it.
Right, if he's ever visited Milwaukee, yes.
Tracking these things.
But yeah, that totally worked, because I was like, why am I not remembering the Milwaukee case?
Well, one last thing here is I think what people are going to get treated to now is a series of arguments about the RICO statute when you talk about what Trump's people are going to be doing here, because these statutes at the federal level, they've been subject to a lot of litigation because people have concerns. And I think it's a really fascinating debate about whether they're overbroad, that they're vague, that they have double jeopardy concerns, First Amendment issues, 10th Amendment issues. And there's been a ton of back and forth over whether these are constitutional or not. And one thing you can bank on is that these right-wing figures are quickly going to be fashioning themselves RICO experts now and arguing that these statutes shouldn't exist, which, like, these types of statutes exist because of law and order Republicans mostly, right?
So, a lot of them were used initially to prosecute organized crime that had penetrated organized labor, which is a real good indication that, that Republicans have been fond of these for a long time, right? When you think back to what, there have been at times cases where, particularly I think in New York and Chicago, where the mafia was very tied into organized labor. And that's where, so yeah, all of a sudden Republicans will be, but Republicans who are also very quick to try and conflate in the American mind organized crime and organized labor. Like, they genuinely want you to believe that the person who shows up to organize a workplace of like nurses is like a mobster, right? Yeah, it doesn't surprise me that they would, much like they have abandoned their opposition to Russia.
Well, you are from Kansas City, where apparently the KC mob
that was a thing.
Historically was very tight with labor.
I'm reading a great book about it right now.
Okay, so let's actually shift to Hunter. So Merrick Garland made a pretty big announcement that I think.
Oh, actually, wait, before we go to Hunter, can we talk about this Trump report that he's putting out?
Oh yeah, I forgot about that. Stuff. Yeah. So
go ahead,
Trump
lay into it.
Yeah, he said he's going to release a large, complex, detailed, but irrefutable report, which is in all caps, on the presidential election fraud, which took place in Georgia. And he's going to do this 11 a.m. on Monday of next week in Bedminster. This is what he said on Truth Social. Do you think this is a good strategy?
I think it's a strategy. I think it's a Trump type strategy. It's made me think of two things. One that is kind of silly and personal, and then one that is less silly but still personal. Okay, so thing one is, so you and I both went to law school, but you had the good fortune to never really practice law. And I practiced law for a few years. And I can remember there being many times when, like, I was putting together like a large legal brief full of arguments, and it would just get too big, right? And I remember, like, one of the lawyers I worked for would come in and I would take over an entire conference room, and I would have, like, it was like a Beautiful Mind in there, right? I had like note cards up everywhere, and like I would take over the whole table, and none of it would make sense, but it would make sense in my brain. And I would put together like this 50, 60 page brief. I hated doing this stuff, but when I would do it, I would just lean all the way in, and then I would file it thinking like, I'm going to blow this judge's mind. And then it would just like denied. Like it was because I would get so deep into my own arguments and ideas that I would completely sometimes lose touch with like the idea that, like, I was just going too deep into my argument. And I think there's a part of that here, and that's not Trump. I think that's this Liz Harrington, the staffer that is putting this together. I just picture her in a room with note cards citing crazy stuff that crazy people have said, and she's gotten so deep into building this thing that I believe that she truly believes that this is going to do exactly what Trump is saying, which is cause everybody to be like, oh my God, we got it all wrong. This is the big twist at the end. Bruce Willis was dead the whole time. You know, like that level of, sorry if I just spoil the movie for it's, you've had plenty of time, people. But that level of twist. And I think she probably in her mind believes that all these charges are going to be dropped and there's going to be apologies. That's the first thing that makes me laugh. The second thing is the Trump side of this, which is this reminds me quite a lot of after Trump won in 2016. When he took office in 2017, one of the first things he did was he wanted to, attack American democracy, as he has been doing for many years. And so he tried to dress it up, like church it up, in official sounding and looking procedures and names. And so he created, I don't remember what they called it, but it was like the Voter Integrity Commission. And if you remember, Chris Kobach, the then Secretary of State, now Attorney General, actually, of Kansas, was made to chair the thing. And at that time, I and Abe Rakove, who worked for me on all things political, we went to Tom Perez, who was the chair of the DNC, and we were like, we need a commission that will counter this commission because it's going to seem really legit. It's a presidential commission on voter fraud. And so I remember Tom Perez was like, okay, let's do it. He said, Jason, you'll chair it. What do you want to call it? And we were like, we want to call it the Commission to Protect American Democracy from the Trump administration. And he was like, don't you think that's a little on the nose? And I was like, well, I think that's the thing is you got to be on the nose. And so that's what we did. And basically it was several people who you would know were on it, like Cory Booker and Alex Padilla, who's now a senator, was Secretary of State then, and people like that. And we basically, when Kobach would do his thing, we would show up and like do our thing and protest and stuff. And I think the Kobach Commission only ended up having 2 meetings because nobody would cooperate with it. But my point is, because it was such a dog and pony show. My point is, like, this is what Trump does. Like, I think Liz Harrington really believes that she's putting together this smoking gun, argument. And I think Trump is like, look, this is what we do. We say things that are legit are not legit, and we make it seem very official when we do so. And I think this is the same move. I think it might be a problem with some of these cases.
Yeah. By the way, you remind me remember that the interstate compact that we were talking about from the states to protect the vote, like they sharing information for voter fraud prosecutions and stuff that the Republican states pulled out of. I was just reading an article the other day that Republican states are flailing now to try to tamp down on voter fraud because they're not part of that commission. It's so crazy. Okay. All right. Let's talk about Hunter. Garland made this big announcement late last week on Friday. Let's go to this clip.
In a July 2023 letter to Congress, Mr. Weiss said that he had not to that point requested special counsel designation. On Tuesday of this week, Mr. Weiss advised me that in his judgment, his investigation had reached a stage at which he should continue his work as a special counsel, and he asked to be so appointed. Upon considering his request, as well as the extraordinary circumstances relating to this matter, I have concluded that it is in the public interest to appoint him as special counsel. This appointment confirms my commitment to provide Mr. Weiss all the resources he requests. It also reaffirms that Mr. Weiss has the authority he needs to conduct a thorough investigation and to continue to take the steps he deems appropriate independently, based only on the facts and the law.
So this is fascinating for a number of reasons. One is that the 2 star witnesses at the Hunter Biden hearings recently were these IRS agents who their big claim was that Merrick Weiss, who's the U.S. Attorney for Delaware, who's a Trump-appointed U.S. Attorney who's been kept on to keep this investigation going.
We should point out these are at the congressional hearings, not in the court
Congressional
proceedings.
congressional hearings. They had these IRS agents show up who said that, among other things, that Weiss had sought special counsel status and was denied or told he wasn't going to get it. And then Weiss quickly clarified, hey, no, actually, I have not sought special counsel status, which makes him even more independent. Like he was by all accounts independent anyway, but it makes him fully walled off from everybody at this point now. And so Weiss clarified, he was like, look, I haven't sought special counsel status, and if I did, I would get it. And now he's gotten it. I think this happens also as Hunter's plea deal has fallen apart, which I find really puzzling if you read the details in this. Basically, it seems like the prosecutors and the defense were arguing / bickering in front of the judge, who was asking sort of pointed questions to Hunter's team about whether they believed that the deal that they struck would make them immune from future prosecution, and apparently it didn't, but the defense thought it did. It seems like a huge mess. Obviously, like, this is a clear one of many clear pieces of evidence that the Biden administration is going by the book and walling this off and doing all the proper things. The right wing is like perplexingly up in arms about this now. I don't exactly know what they want, but they'd been calling for this and now they don't want it. I don't know. It makes no sense. But I would say this is a bit of a mess, both from Hunter's side of things with his attorneys and whatever's going on between them and the prosecutors. I'd also say, Jason, like, I think the White House needs to tighten up on this kind of stuff. Like, we could go through it, but they've made like some contradictory statements, but some that have been contradicted by Hunter, some that are contradicted by things that we just know from the public record. Biden has gotten really defensive and sparred with reporters about this kind of stuff, including like reporters who are just asking basic questions about this. I get that it's his son, and I get that he's sensitive to this, but I don't think Biden himself has anything to hide. And so I think they should get a little bit more buttoned up and organized about this, because this thing ain't going away.
I have to imagine this is a super hard thing for the very reason you mentioned, to get buttoned up about, right? Like, imagine you're working for Biden, right? Look, you don't have to know Biden personally to understand how he feels about his family, and particularly the way, the tragedy that has taken place on more than one occasion with his family, like how deeply he feels about that sort of thing and how sensitive all that is. But like, I've talked to, President Biden before he was president about Beau and about his family. And like, when you talk to him about those things, it's different than the public persona. He slows down. He's even more, it's not like, oftentimes with Joe Biden, there is this very charming, folksy nature, but also you do hear the same things over and over again, right? So it can tend to be like, okay, I get it. That's sort of the persona. And you get below the persona, and he talks in the way a father talks about his children and his family. And so imagine you're working in the White House and you have to address this kind of thing as like, hey, we really need to be really reticent to address any of this, and we can't get our back up about it. We can't be offended. Like, who in the White House is going to go tell a father that, right? Like, somebody obviously is, but that's a very difficult thing to do. And so I'm only saying it to say I sympathize with both Biden and with the staff and having to deal with something like this that is, as you said, not in any way because of the president's doing, but but the Republicans are working very, very hard to make it seem like it is.
Yeah, there are a couple of missteps here that I think are just 101 type of stuff on this. And again, like, it is understandable that he'd be sensitive about his son, etc. But number one, don't snap at reporters who are asking questions. I think two is, don't answer for your son. Like, he's at various points answered questions about who got paid by what. There was one interaction that, when I was in my debate with Ricky about this, she understandably threw it back in my face, which was Biden basically going line by line with the reporters saying, oh, we didn't know Biden, including my son, received money from X, Y, and Z. And it turns out that wasn't even exactly accurate. It wasn't inaccurate because Joe Biden took any money, which he would know, but his son did. And the Biden shouldn't be answering questions for his son anymore. Let his son answer,
Mhm.
you know?
Yeah. So I was thinking a lot about this, and I was thinking about like how we could be helpful to listeners. And I think it's about how not to respond to this stuff, right? So like
Mhm.
because Hunter Biden is gonna come up a fair amount, right?
Yeah, this thing ain't going
We
away.
know this. I mean, they're gonna talk about this. I mean, heck, they talked about it in the midterms, and Biden wasn't on the ballot. So we know that's what is gonna happen. So I think the first thing I could say is how not to respond, which is I don't think it, and this is most people's first instinct, but I don't think it does much good to compare Hunter Biden to Jared Kushner, or to compare Hunter Biden to Donald Trump Jr., or to compare to Ivanka, because I think that's what the Republicans want. And that's what Trump world wants. Because as we know, like there is the idea of the Biden crime family is an invented concept, right? But they want it to be real. And the surest way to make it feel real is to equate the two. Because the thing is, like, a lot of Republican voters, whether they say it out loud or not, they agree, or they at least acknowledge that Trump doesn't always stay on the right side of the law, and that his family doesn't stay on the right side of the law. But they've decided that they've baked that in, and they've either justified it or they've accepted it and decided, well, I like what he did with this, or I like the way he hurts the people I want hurt, or whatever it is.
Right.
So when you compare the two, even though the comparison is beyond apples and oranges, they're completely separate. Once you're comparing them, now you're doing what they want, which is you're muddling them and you're making them both the same. And politics is the only world where that can so easily be done, right? You can take two things that have nothing to do with one another, but because people have such a deep cynicism about politicians, if you just put two things in the same sentence, now they're the same.
Right.
And so I think people have to be careful not to fall into that trap.
Yeah. Well, okay, we're going to take a break and hear from our
That-
sponsors. When we come back,
Well,
we're going to break
yeah.
down. Oh, sorry, Jason. Well, when we come back, we're going to
No,
give you
no,
the
no,
final
it's
word
fine.
on
I don't
this,
have anything
and
to-
then and then we're going to hit the trail and we're going to check in with some of our favorite and not so favorite GOP candidates who spent some time down in Iowa. All that and more when we get back. Sleep is super important, especially if you're really like to be active and you got a lot going on. If you get a bad night's rest, you'll know that it'll weigh on you throughout the day. It affects everything that you do. And on the flip side, if you have an amazing night's rest, everything comes easy to you throughout the day. And we don't think enough about our sleep. Like back in the day, you just kind of go to the mattress store and there's just like a one-size-fits-all mattress. But with Helix, you can take a sleep quiz. It takes almost no time, and they'll fit you to a mattress that's right for you. I have the Midnight Lux mattress because I like a medium feel and I sleep on my side. And Helix, they know everybody's unique. Everybody sleeps differently. And so they have different mattress models to choose from, each designed for specific sleep positions and feel preferences. And not only is the mattress that I have the best I've ever had, but it was super fast and easy. They deliver it right to your house in a box, straight to your door for free. So go ahead, go take that sleep quiz, and you can find the perfect mattress for you in under 2 minutes. And if you don't take my word for it, Helix Sleep has over 12,000 five-star reviews. I'm a little jealous. Go out there and give 5-star reviews for this podcast. I want us to get to 12,000. I'm jealous of Helix. But by supporting Helix, you're allowing them to support our show. So go out there, purchase your Helix mattress. You can thank me later. They're offering 20% off all mattress orders and 2 free pillows for our listeners. It's 20% off all mattress orders and 2 free pillows for our listeners. Go to helixsleep.com/majority54. This is their best offer yet, and it won't last long. With Helix, better sleep starts now. So this summer, you could spend thousands of dollars on planes, hotels, and tourist traps, or you could spend less money on a beautiful garden that will give you years of pleasure with FastGrowingTrees.com. FastGrowingTrees.com has thousands of easy-to-grow plant, shrub, and tree varieties expertly curated for your unique climate and needs, from Meyer lemons to evergreens to shade trees and everything in between. No more waiting in long lines and hauling heavy plants around. With FastGrowingTrees.com, you can order online and your plants arrive at your door in just a few days. If you don't have a green thumb, no problem. Fast Growing Trees Plant experts are just a Zoom chat or phone call away, always available, eager to help. They can even walk you through your entire garden to help solve problems you're having with plants and trees. And look, like, you don't even have to have a house or a backyard. I have an apartment in Brooklyn, and I just moved there, and I used one of the fast growing trees experts, and I was like, here's, I showed them my lighting situation. I know nothing about plants because I grew up in the city, and I was like, hey, what should I get for this apartment? Now I've got a whole bunch of plants all over my apartment. I even have a tree inside my apartment because of fast growing trees and their experts. It's really amazing. It totally livened up the place. So go to fastgrowingtrees.com. They have a 30-day Alive and Thrive guarantee. And everything will look great, fresh out of the box, but that guarantee will help you if something happens. But join almost 2 million happy Fast Growing Trees customers. That's a lot of people. Go to fastgrowingtrees.com/54 now to get 15% off your entire order. That's 15% at fastgrowingtrees.com/54. fastgrowingtrees.com/54.
All right, Ravi, I gave what not to do in the Hunter Biden thing when talking to people. And then I kind of forgot to give the second half before we went to the ad, which is like what I think we should do. So let me do that real quick because I didn't want to leave people hanging. I think there's two things here. One, I think it's important to empathize and humanize the situation. When someone brings this up, I think you just got to come from a human perspective. And I know I've said this before, but you got to come from a human perspective and be like, look, from what I can tell, there is no evidence whatsoever of Joe Biden doing anything improper. But I think the important part of this is you cannot, in order to do this strategy, you cannot defend Hunter Biden at all costs. Because clearly Hunter Biden has done some things wrong, and you have to say this. And you, I think, did this in your debate with Ricky. You have to say, look, this is a guy who's had a lot of trauma in his life. We all know what happened when he was very young, losing his mother, losing his sister. And then when he was older, the person closest to him, his older brother, then died of brain cancer. He's been through a lot of stuff that doesn't excuse his behavior, but it's not out of the ordinary for people who've been through a lot to turn to things like substance. And that's what happened. And now he's struggling with that. And like a lot of people who struggle with that, with addiction, it has led to other behavior that he's certainly not proud of, and that his father may not be proud of, but his father remains a loving father. And it's I think you got to empathize with that situation. Whoever you're talking to, if you know them well enough, you might even be able to reference someone or even something that's gone on in their family and say, it seems like a really difficult situation. And clearly it's not anything that rises to the president's level other than he's his dad. I think that's the first thing. And then the second part is you got to go right from there. You got to pivot to what actually affects people's lives. And this is the difference between what Trump is doing with all of the accusations against him and what Biden does with the occasional, much less numerous accusations against him, which is what Biden always does is he's like, okay, here's, yes, that's the accusation. He'll pivot away from it, and then he'll talk about what's going on in the lives of everyday Americans. And that's what you've got to do, because at the end of the day, people who are leaning toward voting for Trump or a Republican in the next election are not ultimately going to come around and vote for Biden because they figure out that they don't like Trump or they don't like the Republicans who have supported Trump. If that was going to happen, it would have happened years ago. When they come around, it's because they don't like the extreme positions on abortion, or because they don't like the idea of their healthcare being taken away, or they don't, any of these sorts of things. So you make the statement that concedes that there's clearly been some bad behavior by Hunter. You empathize with the situation, and then you talk about, look, I don't know about all that stuff. Let me tell you why I can't support Trump. And then don't make it about Trump's behavior. Make it about the things that Trump and the Republicans stand for. That's my 2 cents.
Well, amen to that. Jason, let's pop down to Iowa. We're at that place now where the candidates are spending basically as much time as possible down in Iowa. And although Trump is trouncing the rest of the field nationally, it's a bit narrower in Iowa. He's still got a pretty sizable lead, but it's narrower in Iowa, in part because it's a smaller state. A lot of his opponents are spending all of their time down there, where he, as Trump, as we made clear, is pretty distracted by other matters. But Iowa also, these voters, I was down there for the Obama campaign in 2007 and 2008. They really value their place as the voters who get to quote unquote select the president, right? They want to go first. They have a little bit of ego about it. And in this case, Trump's opponents, I think, largely think that this is their last stand. A lot of them, like if they can't beat him in Iowa, it's hard to imagine them beating him at all. And Trump, I think, has taken notice. He went down to
in Iowa in 2016.
Yeah, I mean,
I can see why they think
there's a
that.
lot of history of people losing Iowa and still winning the nomination. Ted Cruz won Iowa, and if you remember 2008, Huckabee won Iowa, although Obama won Iowa. So it does matter. But Trump went down to Iowa, and he was asked about DeSantis. This is at the Iowa State Fair, which I've had the chance to go to. It's quite an affair. But here's DeSantis. Trump talking about DeSantis at the Iowa State Fair.
Mr. President, Governor DeSantis is here today too. Do you have a message for him?
We had a very small crowd.
Careful.
We only had a few people show up. It's a big difference. But he'll report it accurately. And say hello to the great lady, right?
Do you have any concern from the support he's getting from Iowa legislators?
We've gotten great support. We have with us most of the Congress people from Florida. We have, more importantly than anything right now, I guess we're up 50 points in Iowa, 5-0. We're up tremendously in Iowa and every place else.
Is there anything extra you're doing to hopefully win the Iowa caucuses?
We did a job for Iowa that nobody could do, the farm places. We have, you take a look at the kind of money we took in, $28 billion from China and gave that to our farmers, so all over the country. So they like Trump and I like them.
So, yeah, I listened to some interviews that reporters did with people at the State Fair about why they like Trump, and they mention his farm policies, the tariffs, which is a whole other segment, I guess. But he went straight at DeSantis, and DeSantis had his own, he's been down there a lot. Part of what they're asking him is DeSantis, the conventional wisdom is that DeSantis is overperforming with kind of like local party brass, like the heads of the local parties, et cetera. And in this case, they asked him about state legislators who like him. DeSantis also is cozy with the governor of Iowa, and he did an event with the governor at which he was heckled. This might not come across perfectly in audio, but let's go to this clip. This is DeSantis trying to do an interview at the Iowa State Fair with the governor of Iowa while Trump supporters are just chiming in from the audience.
Okay. So I always understood you have an opportunity to work hard, get the most out of your God-given ability.
And yet nobody has been held accountable in the federal government for their disastrous lockdown policies. We're going to bring a reckoning to that so that this never happens to our country ever again. Thank you.
So the governor had to actually stop at various points and scold her own voters, the audience. There also was a banner that flew above. I think the Trump team put it together. It said, "Be likable, Ron." Jason, I don't even know. I don't know if there's a takeaway from any of this. It's just I kind of wish this was closer.
Well, I'll tell you. Well, yeah, because Trump is like a horrible, awful person, and DeSantis is just trying as hard as possible to be more horrible and awful, maybe, but he isn't Trump. Like so, like we all, Team Democracy wishes that Trump was not as successful as he is. But I think what's interesting about this, is just as an observer, is that Trump is not only the front runner, like he's essentially the incumbent in the primary, right?
Yeah. It's a rare, it's happened historically, but it's rare for somebody to lose and run again.
Right. So like when it comes to who we choose, like he's the incumbent in that, like when it comes to getting the presidential nomination for the Republicans, like he's done it the last 2 times and he's basically running for renomination. Right. So that makes him basically the incumbent, which makes it so interesting that there are still hordes of people who will go out and be what are functionally political insurgents, right? Like you just got people going out and disrupting events and doing. So it is very odd that you have a guy who is basically the establishment in the party, and yet at the same time, he is the anti-establishment figure. And that at the end of the day is both why it's incredibly unlikely that he's unseated as the nominee, because when you are the establishment and the anti-establishment, there ain't a whole lot of room left to fight you. But it's also why he is so dangerous as a nominee, more so than we realize, because he doesn't play by the rules, as we know, like as many courts or many prosecutors have attested to now. And that means it's like, if Ron DeSantis is the nominee, you don't have to rewrite the playbook on how to run for re-election if you're Joe Biden, or if you're a candidate for the US Senate and you're having to run in that environment. But you have to rewrite the playbook every time to run against Trump, because his people are just not above showing up and disrupting the comments of the governor of their state.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, and trolling and like having a banner that just says "be likable," and so that's what I take from that.
Well, I have one other video to show you that I think, honestly,
I think did you know about this before I texted it to you?
no, I didn't even see you text that. I
texted this to you as soon as I saw it.
Okay.
I
want to remind our audience that we were early on this Vivek thing. Vivek Ramaswamy. We've been talking about him for a while. He's now polling second in the most recent polls I saw in the national field, which is insane. And so he decided to give a performance at the Iowa State Fair. Let's go to this clip.
Getting what he wrote down, the whole crowd goes so
loud. He opens his mouth, but the words won't come out. He's joking how everybody's joking now. The clock's run out, time's up, over, plow, snap back to reality. Oh, there goes gravity. Oh, there goes rabbit. He choke. He's so mad, but he won't give up that easy. No,
I think this is longer than I wanted it to be. All right, we can move on. Adam. I rarely.
So suffice it to say, Vivek Ramaswamy did lose yourself at the end of his Q&A.
Yes.
So,
well, okay.
How do we break this down?
I have something to say about this. There are kind of two camps of politicians that I've dealt with at Arena. You mentioned at the beginning, I've helped a lot of candidates. There are people who were really cool and the popular person in school, and part of their appeal as candidates are they're popular, right? You think of Wes Moore, you think of Barack Obama, Cory Booker. You get these people who are just like cool, and part of their appeal is people like them. Campaigning comes easy to them. Then you have a lot of people, and I would say this is probably the majority of people who run for office. I would say you're a cool person, Jason, and I got to be careful because you.
I appreciate that. No, I appreciate that. I was somewhere in the middle. I was like sometimes cool, and I was never not cool, but I was sometimes just. People are like, "Oh yeah, that guy's there." So
then there are the vast majority of candidates out there, and I would say no offense, but it is offensive to these candidates what I'm about to say, which is. The people who are just really, really not cool, and part of their sort of their complex that makes them decide to run for office and go through the gauntlet of running for office is like this deep-seated just like wounds that they have of being nerds or outcasts or whatever. And when I look at Vivek Ramaswamy rapping Eminem to a crowd at the Iowa State Fair, I can't help but think that this guy is a kind of a loser. I don't know what else to say. Like, he's a guy who like clearly has some deep-seated issues going back to high school, maybe middle school. I can't imagine what would make him decide to do that. But he's the kind of guy who I guess doesn't have the kind of staff who's going to step in. And you were talking about like Joe Biden's staff, like needing to tell him the uncomfortable truth. Somebody needs to tell Vivek the uncomfortable truth about this performance.
Well, okay, let me play devil's advocate just for fun, okay? Which is that he didn't do a horrible job. He didn't do a good job of performing it, but it wasn't completely cringy.
But what is it? But what is it is what I'm saying. Like, it's not
here's my point. Here's my argument is that if you're a Republican at the Iowa State Fair who is considering Vivek Ramaswamy, it has to be like, you've got to be somebody who is attracted to the idea of the next generation, something different, somebody who delivers the same sort of hateful language and lines and intolerance, but does it. And, we had, I forget the young woman's name who came on the show and talked about gender washing, where they where the Republicans will have a candidate who says all of the same hateful and terrible things, but it'll be a woman. And so it seems not quite as harsh because it's a woman. And here you have an Indian, I think he's Indian American, right? An Indian American guy who is young. Those two things are not considered typically Republican. And now he's, rapping, which is way off the chart of things that are considered typically Republican, particularly conservatives at the Iowa State Fair. So is it some brilliant strategy to actually be different in a way that, none of the others have been able to become different? I don't know.
Okay.
I don't think so, but I wanted to say those words and see what would happen.
I've had enough of the GOP field, Jason. Let's grab an oar.
Okay, absolutely. So for Grab an Oar, what I was thinking we would talk about this week, just real quickly, is what's going on in Hawaii and in Maui with the horrible tragedy, the fires, the people who have lost their lives. And it's just an opportunity for all of us to try and do something about it, to grab an oar and be supportive of the efforts there. And I was looking up different causes. I think if you want to choose your own cause to give to, the one I found that hit home with me is the Hawaii Community Foundation. They have a Maui Strong Fund. To me, that made the most sense because it's local, and there's really no doubt whether or not it's local and whether or not the money's going to stay there. And so I found several places where it was recommended. So I would just encourage people, look, this show is about us being able to make arguments and make inroads in red states, but it is also really just about trying to help people in blue states or red states. And so Iowa is in need of that help right now.
Yeah, terrible.
So with that said, one for us.
Yeah, well, I'm over in Maine. Great state. I'm in Booth Bay Harbor, Maine. I haven't been to Maine in about a decade, but came up here because there's New England in the summer, because you were up in Boston recently. New England in the summer is beautiful.
Oh, it's amazing.
I don't go near it in the wintertime, but when it's nice out, love it. One of the best places in the world in the summertime. So I'm just up here enjoying life, about to go sailing after this. Yeah. And I'm training for the Open, that tennis match where if I lose, I get a tattoo on my butt. So I've been
when is that?
That is September 9th.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's coming up. Okay. I love
my game's getting tight. I'm getting tight. I'm actually doing my first legit tennis tournament the weekend before that in Brooklyn. There's like the Prospect Park is having a tennis tournament that I'm entering. It'll be good practice for the Pura Vida Open. But I'm entering like the intermediate level part of it. So it'll be interesting.
That's awesome. Yeah. Good for you. As you know, I'm a big supporter of competitive sports at all ages.
Yeah.
First, real quick, the one for us is I'm going to mention again that the paperback for Invisible Storm, my book, has come out and people can get it wherever you get your books. But really what I want to talk about is today is actually mine and Diana's 20th wedding anniversary.
Oh my God.
Yeah, which is very cool. And I've been, really reflecting on this today and yesterday. And yesterday was like just a day, I love my wife every day. But yesterday I was just feeling an awful lot of love. And there were two moments. One where, as you know, the Raufi family, the Afghan family that we've been a part of helping them get out of Afghanistan because of our connection to them from my service, but also getting them here to the United States. And now they live and have for the last 8 weeks, 6 minutes from our house here in Kansas City, have become part of our family. And my wife has just really, really jumped in to doing things with the Raufi family. In fact, yesterday she organizes every year in our neighborhood, along with a couple of neighbors, just a water balloon fight with the neighbor kids and with our kids. And this year we went and got the Raufi kids. And so it was like a really sweet moment where my wife had, and I had told Rahim Raufi, the head of the family, when he was still stuck in Afghanistan and I was trying to help him get out, I said to him, one day our kids will play together in my backyard. And so, and just my wife making that happen, it made me feel a lot of love. But then a couple hours later, we were at True's baseball game. And, when Diana and I were dating many, many years ago now, and even before we had kids, like she never, and this is probably true for a lot of women, she never saw herself as I always would just couldn't wait to be a dad. I don't think she's been a person that's like, I can't wait to be a mom. But she always was like, I know we're going to have kids, but it was not a part of her future identity or anything like that. But she's this incredible mom, but she's also this, she's a great speaker and a businesswoman, and she does all these things. But there was a moment yesterday at True's baseball game where she's sitting there with Bella on her lap, and True was like sliding into third. He was running into third, and I heard Diana louder than anybody else yell, "Down, down!" like top of her lungs, like yelling at True to slide. And then like the ball was overthrown. She was like, "Go, go!" And it was just really funny because I just immediately thought back to my wife, who I remember once looking at a woman who was wearing, at my military intelligence school graduation, there was a spouse there wearing a black shirt, and there was a toddler that was eating Cheetos, and it was like all over her. And Diana was like, at least 2 more years before we have kids, at least 2 more years. And now she's like full on travel baseball mom and like really into it. And anyway, so I'm feeling a lot of love, as I am every day for.
Well, congratulations, 20 years. My goodness. And the book you mentioned at the start of this, I made this point when it first came out, but it's as much a love story as it is anything else. It's a really
That's true.
touching book. And Diana actually has, she, for those of you who haven't read the book yet, Diana kind of weighs in throughout the book on Jason's account of things. And I've never seen a book do it like that. And it's really well executed.
Well, thanks, man. I appreciate it very much. And this has been fun as always. Thank you, everybody. Remember to subscribe to Majority 54 wherever you listen to audio podcasts. Just search Majority 54 and please leave a 5-star review. Thank you to the Meidas Mighty. And remember, we all have a platform. Make sure to use yours today.